Today, we're going to talk about transformational leadership. For anyone aspiring to ascend in their career, experience with outperforming executives, particularly CEOs, is a critical learning experience and one that you'll never forget. So we've called in a standout CEO to share her insights on how to lead a company through transformation and how HR plays a critical role in its success. My guest is Dawn Zier, prior CEO of Nutrisystem, who has been heralded as leading one of the most historic company turnarounds of our time, where she fundamentally changed the culture and offer of the organization, resulting in double the revenue and 7 times the profit. Dawn is now a board chair, board member, and CEO coach who has been recognized as one of the top 100 most influential corporate directors and governance experts. Dawn, it's such a pleasure to have you join us on Voices of HR. Welcome.
Thank you, Bert. It's great to be here today.
So let's start off at the macro level. So as a board chair, as a board member, you identify and decide how best to navigate trends across the globe. What is the one trend or two that most CEOs and CHROs should pay attention to over the next, let's say, 1 to 3 years, and how would you recommend they think about it or adapt to it?
I think one of the trends we're seeing is the empowered workforce in a way that we haven't seen before. And there's been lots of talk about this, but I do believe we saw a pendulum swing in one direction that will begin to swing back. But the real question for leaders is how are we going to balance flexibility and productivity? How do we retain our talent? We know it's much more cost effective and beneficial to an organization to retain talent than acquire new talent. And I believe part of that ties back to culture, mission, sense of belonging, especially for the younger generation. So I think that's one of the things that as leaders we have to ourselves be flexible, but we also have to make sure that we're getting the productivity we need. I think gone is the 5-day work week in terms of in office. And what that looks like 2 to 3 years from now, I think will be different than what we're seeing today, but something we just need to all adapt and learn from each other because this is new ground for everybody.
It is. Post-pandemic has just really turned everything upside down. So, and it's really put the CHRO in the hot seat to figure all of this out.
Yeah, and I think there's one other thing too that a lot of executives, especially the younger leaders, have not seen an economic downturn. And we may or may not see that in the next couple of years, but it is a different mindset and operating principles when you're going through a period of economic downturn rather than a period of economic growth. So I think as directors and as leaders that have been through it before, we have to share our collective experiences and help navigate through that.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and pull that through. So you have this incredibly unique perspective on so many topics, a variety of topics, from strategy to leadership to HR, where you have talked about cost centers versus profit centers. So let's start with strategy. So part of our goal with this podcast is really to demystify strategic acumen for HR. Strategy is emerging as this number one skill set for executives, given the speed and complexity at which leaders, must be in tune with the shifts in the marketplace, the ones especially that you just talked about. So to be transformative, you must have a strategic agenda. And as a CEO and now a board chair, do you employ a specific strategic process that you consistently follow that our listeners could maybe replicate or be inspired by? Like, how do you think about strategy?
When I think about strategy, I like my acronyms, Berta. So when I think about strategy and the strategic framework, I like to say frame the strategy, where F is about focus on the priorities, the things that can move the needle on both the top and bottom line, and then clear out the rest of the stuff. You have to F focus. R, have the right people in the right seats, high performers that are cultural enablers. A, align the entire organization around the goals. Measure, hold accountable, and reward and differentiate for performance. I'm a big believer in differentiating for performance. And then E, because businesses are fluid, evaluate the plan periodically, the strategy, and don't be afraid to revamp as necessary. So I like to use that as a call out message in any strategic discussion that we're embarking on to really, again, frame that strategy.
I love that. I love acronyms. I think they always they do put that focus,
Right.
on the framing. So, if you have we have aspiring CHROs that
Hmm.
are listening, and far too many of our leadership books really focus on leading people, which I think we would both agree, incredibly important skill set.
Absolutely.
And the one thing that we don't talk about particularly as often when we're cultivating our C-suite, particularly with women, is the need to drive business results and create business value. And to some degree, I've seen the lack of business acumen hinder women's progress into the C-suite. What's your unique perspective on the importance of business acumen and people leadership for these aspiring executives?
I think it's an and it's not an either or. So you need both
Mhm,
to be successful. You cannot be a CEO without business acumen.
mhm.
Unfortunately, you can be a CEO without people leadership. But the good CEOs, the great CEOs have both. And you need to earn that followership, which again, that comes through being able to rally the team. And you earn that as a leader, as a CEO. That's not something that you're entitled to. I don't think we should think that women lack business acumen more than males do. I just don't believe in that. But my number one tip is for anybody looking and aspiring to become a CEO or move up in an organization is you don't have to be a financial expert per se, but you do have to be financially literate. You do need to be focused on goals that are financially oriented, revenue, profit, gross margin, costs, all those things. And you have to have a basic understanding across all functions. So, what I like to tell people is don't stay in your lane. You want to learn other parts of the organization. If you're a marketing person, spend some time getting to know the key metrics in the supply chain area. If you're not financially comfortable, make sure you sit down with your planning and analysis team or your CFO and learn about that. We were all continuous learners, and it's important that we take that and that we own that ourselves as part of our career progression.
I love that notion of expanding your skill set, your
Mhm.
mind, your business acumen across the organization, truly understanding what drives business results.
Right.
So, far too often, I think HR in particular is bifurcated from the business.
Hmm.
It's kind of like here's the people thing over here with the CHROs, and they really aren't financially astute. They're people, they're worried about the people, and we have the business over here to run.
Right.
And they really bifurcate the business and the people. You didn't do that as CEO at Nutrisystem. You really valued your CHRO and suspect that you two worked hand in glove to actually transform the culture. Could you talk to us a little bit about your relationship with your CHRO and how the two of you transformed the culture to a high performance culture?
Okay. Let me back it up a bit because one of the things when I'm looking at working with a company that could be in a leadership role, like being a CEO, it could be as a board director, it could be coaching executives who want to move up in their careers or who are already in the C
Mhm.
suite. What I look for is I always look to see if the CHRO has a seat at the table. And also, how does the team, their peers, view them? Are they being viewed as a business partner, or as you said, more in an administrative role, or they take care of that people stuff? But you and I both know that the people stuff is what really drives an organization to success. You can't do it
Mhm.
without the right talent. So for me, those are two red flags. If the CHRO doesn't have a seat at the table, and if the HR function isn't viewed as a business partner. Now, when I came to Nutrisystem, HR didn't report directly into the CEO function, and that was a red flag for me, and I changed it on day one. And also, I believe that culture and talent is not an issue for HR to solve. The tone has to be set at the top. It's one of the most important things that a CEO can do. And that's what we did at Nutrisystem. And then I did work hand in hand with my CHRO to bring that culture to life, to set the tone as to what our values were and how we expected the team to work together. And then we measured individuals against those values as part of the annual bonus program. I think it's incredibly important that the message has to come from the top. If you tell HR to go execute something, but you don't provide the support or the belief as a leader that this is important, the rest of the organization won't follow. And again, the most important thing to achieving your objectives is, do you have the right people in the right seats? And are they impassioned and driven to do what you're asking them to do?
And part of that, I suspect, is getting the right people in the right seats, but then also creating the infrastructure, the
Hmm.
culture that's really going to support what you're asking them to do.
Right.
And you had conducted this interview with, I think it was the CEO Forum Group.
Hmm.
It was an interview that you had done, which I would recommend everyone in our audience listen to, and we will make sure and put that link in our notes at the bottom. But you stated that it's easy to find smart people.
Hmm.
So you encouraged HR and companies to hire culture enhancers. Why culture enhancers and not those who adhere to the culture?
In fairness, this is something that my CHRO at Nutrisystem and I discussed quite a lot. It's easy to build a culture of people that all look like you, that think like you, that share your values. And you want that. The values are something that shouldn't be negotiable. But you also have to bring in people that are going to push the thinking to a different level and are going to create a positive friction in terms of change and what you need to do to get to the next level, because culture can always be built on and expanded. So what I wanted to make sure is that I felt I had put a strong leadership team in place, but that I didn't want us to get too comfortable in just doing it the way we were doing it. I wanted to bring in people that had different thoughts, different mindsets. That could be new leaders to the team, it could be outside people that would help enhance our thinking. And I do think it is about a journey and about continually enhancing that culture, because again, companies are dynamic, they don't stay in one static place. So making sure that you're constantly enhancing the culture for the issues you're currently facing, and you're building upon the culture you set. So I do think it's an evolution, and it's not, I don't think you ever arrive. I think it's a journey and it's an evolution, which is why we always want to work hard to enhance it and not just keep at the status quo, even if it's good at the time.
Yeah, you had used the terminology positive friction,
Yeah.
which I absolutely love because you're not a leader that shies away from someone who has an opinion.
No.
And not at all. I've seen you in action, and you absolutely take everyone's perspective to create the best answer. But when I see really what I would consider these inspired leadership posts on social media, a lot of them call for leaders to have courage.
Hmm.
And I think having courage in the workplace is an incredibly difficult ask in some organizations where they don't have a leader that wants to hear a variety and difference of perspective, maybe even if it's against their own. But it's completely necessary in order to, I suspect, ignite change and
Hmm.
transformation. It also reminds me of the time that I asked you to write the foreword for winning the talent shift and also provide an endorsement on the back. And you didn't hesitate, even though the content was a bit controversial, because it illuminated this whole notion around imposter leaders,
Hmm.
people who create the friction, but in a negative way.
Right.
They occupy these executive leadership roles and they really don't contribute to the enterprise. They're really very self motivated. And of course, my research showed that it has a very detrimental effect on high performing individuals, particularly women and people of color. But as a CEO, you are one of the first that I've heard publicly state that executives and leaders should not be afraid to remove damaging leaders. And I would also say that is a call to leverage courage both for the C suite and for human resources. So the question is, why the incredibly brave stance and courageous stance on the subject of these imposter leaders?
I think that it stems back to early on in my career at Reader's Digest, where I was in a position where I could eliminate somebody that was being what I like to call a cultural detractor,
Mm,
was eroding the culture that we set in place, yet was highly effective in getting things done. And I found that I was always trying to work around that person and often make excuses for his behavior because he was such a contributor to the numbers. And what I didn't realize at the time, early on in my career, is the damage that that person actually made to the culture. And I did not eliminate that position. I moved on to a different role, and somebody else came in and eliminated that person's role, eliminated that person's tenure at the company. And then one of my former team members said, "Yeah, we always wondered why you didn't do it." And that really stuck hard. And it's
mm,
something I remember to this day. And it's probably one of my biggest career mistakes, although it's one of my best learnings.
mhm,
So I do think that people who are in positions of power that are high performers, but the way they do things are not okay, that you
mhm,
have to take action against that. And I've seen bullying, I've seen intimidation in the workforce, and often we as leaders look away because these individuals get stuff done. But again,
mhm.
how you do things matter. And as both a CEO, a COO, and as a board member, I've worked hard to eliminate this type of negative dynamic in the workplace because, again, while individuals like these might hit their numbers, they leave a wake of carnage in their path that ultimately undermines the culture values that the company has put in place and the morale of the team. And I've found every time that we have let a high performer go for this type of behavior, the team rallies around it, and generally you don't miss a beat. And I think it's incredibly egotistical to think that just because you're smart, you're not replaceable. And as I've said, smart people are a dime a dozen. So do the hard work and find people that are going to not only be smart, not only be engaged, but are going to be cultural enhancers and are going to be able to garner the followership to take the entire team to the next level instead of having them, fall behind or shirk away.
Yeah.
I feel
And
really strongly about it.
you do, and I am so thankful as a CEO that you speak up about this because I think it's far too easy to not, as a CEO, really hold your team accountable for how they get things done,
Mhm.
not just the end result. Because as we said at the top of the hour, I mean, you have a historic turnaround, 7 times the profit. I mean, y most would just say, "Okay, well, it didn't matter how she got it done. She got it done. She got the stock price up." But that's not how you operate. It's all about how you get it done.
Well, it's harder to get it done if you're really relying on one person instead of an entire team, or if you don't have people. It's hard work to do a turnaround. It's hard
Mhm,
work to grow a company, and you need everybody rowing in the same direction, and you need a level of engagement that only comes by having a positive culture in place.
mhm. Well, that's when you get your best work out of
Exactly.
everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So there I read a report where over 50% of women in the workplace today who do not have children do not anticipate getting married or having children. And one of the reasons is that it's too difficult to have a career and to be married and to have children. And I totally get it. I remember at that age, you're really questioning my career and thinking the same thing. But you navigated it all
Mhm.
as a mom, as a wife, as a sister, as a daughter, and it can be done. I think we're both testaments to that.
Right.
But it really scares me that these women are thinking that they can't have a family and a career and really have it all. When you think back, what would your advice be to this younger generation about successfully managing life and a career? Can you have it all?
I believe you can. As you said, we're both examples of it. And having it all is really a generalized term because there's always sacrifices and choices that you make. But I do believe you can have a high degree of both if you have a support system around you. I would say that stat of 50% not getting married or having children is startling to me. I have not heard that before, and I really hope it's not true. And I hope it's not true solely for the work life balance equation, because I do think this younger generation is dealing with a lot more as they look forward to the future and a sense of disillusionment, which extends beyond the workplace. So I think they're being very introspective. But again, I hope it's not true. But I do believe that in your career and in your life, you have to make choiceful decisions. You have to prioritize. You have to know when and where to show up as a mom. You have to
Mm-hmm.
know when and where to show up as a leader. You have to know when it's okay not to show up. You have to set boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be present. And that's something I'm still working on today, is put the phone down and be present around my family. And it's
Mm-hmm.
hard work, and you can't underestimate how hard it is. And you need to be able to accept help. So I won't
Mm-hmm.
lie, it's not easy. It hasn't been easy, and you often are burning the candles at both ends. But looking back, there's very little that I would change. And again, I was fortunate to have a support system around me, where my husband and I really had a partnership in how we raised our children, and we were both very involved. But my advice to the younger generation is I believe in them, and I think they get it so much more than we do. I think they're better than us at navigating life with purpose and balance than I certainly was in my 20s and 30s. And I think they've learned lessons in their youth that I only learned in my 40s. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that when I look at my children, none of them want to be like me.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for my role as both a parent and a leader. But they want to do things differently. And it's not as 24/7 on. It's much more balanced. It's much more purposeful. It's much more about making an impact, which is different than necessarily having a, career like maybe I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that this younger generation will be more successful than our generation when we look back 20 years from now and see what they've achieved versus what we've achieved. So I have a lot of admiration, and I take some of my lead these days from watching what that younger generation is doing. So I would
Mm-hmm.
flip it and say maybe we need to take some advice from them. And I know sometimes you hear this generation doesn't want to work as hard. They don't want to do things that we did. But I think that maybe they work smarter through
Mm-hmm.
technology. Maybe they work more efficiently. Maybe they are more driven by purpose and things that we weren't even thinking about, when we were in our 20s and 30s. So I applaud them. It's sort of wait and see, but I think it's going to be interesting. But I don't think, hopefully, 50% are not going to not get married or not have children, because, you and I both know that having children is one of the best things that I consider that my full time job. That was my full time job. And I had the benefit and privilege of being able to have a high powered career. But the children were always first.
They were. And I remember one of my good friends told me one time when I was burning it at both ends, as you had said,
Hmm.
that a company and a job can't love you back. And it was so true. It's when you go home at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And, the company wasn't going to love you back. So I never forgot that. Never forgot it.
Well, I always think of my life as three sections, and one is my business persona,
Hmm.
my family persona, and my friend persona. And when I look at those three segments of my life, I need 2 out of 3 to be humming to feel that I'm in sync. And, nothing is ever perfect. So you do have ebbs and flows in each of those sectors or each of those segments. But I really work hard to make sure that, 2 out of 3 have to be going pretty well, or otherwise it gets really hard. And again, you have to be willing to accept help. You have to have that support group. We like to think we're superwomen, but really
Hmm.
we're superwomen with a net underneath us, and that's our support group, and we need to leverage that.
That's terrific because you're right. Sometimes you can't go on all cylinders all the time.
Right.
maybe for a short period of time, you can rock it on all 3 of those, but
Hmm.
typically not. Can we go ahead and maybe focus on career development? Because
Sure.
we do have a lot of women listeners and who are really aspiring, maybe not to be a CEO or maybe not even to the C suite, but they want to be really, really impactful in
Sure.
the jobs that they have. So let's start here. Some of our listeners are really trying to find their it thing. You had talked about purpose before.
Right.
And I always think that purpose really generates this superpower and superpower generates success for you in the workplace. Would you say that you were always wired to become an outperformer? And did you find that was your purpose? Or when did you realize like what your talents and your skill sets were that kind of drove you to becoming this outperformer that kind of led you into the C suite? Can you give us any perspective on that?
Well, it evolved over time. And I would say the way I was raised and brought up was to work hard and always do my best.
Mm,
And it was not to be the best, it was to be the best that I could be. So
mm,
I always felt that I had that in me. So I always had that drive. I think one of my it factors is that I was an engineer, and I believe to this day, even though I never really practiced it, I think I practiced it for 18 months and did not like it. But what that engineering training taught me how to do was how to think and how
mm,
to solve problems in a very logical way that made problems seem not as overwhelming as one might have thought if you didn't break it down into its components.
mm,
So that to me is something that I constantly go back to that I felt has helped me as a CEO be successful, which was that analytical bent on things and that way of thinking, which is, engineers think a little differently at times, I believe. But I think the other
we do.
thing, and it's sort of a left side, right side of the brain balance, is my intentional focus on culture and my ability to build the teams that reinforce that culture or
Mm,
enhance that culture. And that is something I put a lot of time into. I realize that my success is not my success on my own, it's my
mm.
success because of the team effort that was behind me and the team that I put in place to achieve things. And so I would say those are my it factors, my way of thinking analytically, and then my intense focus and deliberate focus on culture.
And did you, I know you're a huge advocate of mentoring and sponsoring in the
Hmm.
workplace, and you do that quite often. You're a CEO coach.
Sure.
Do you think that women need to ask if they don't have a mentor or a sponsor, how do you recommend that they go about getting one?
Well, I believe mentors, coaches, trusted advisors, it starts with trust, right? So it's very hard to
Mhm.
assign somebody. I often say mentors have to be found, not assigned.
Mm,
And there's sponsorship in an organization, but there's also mentorship, and they can be different things. I
mhm,
encourage everyone to have mentors or that group of trusted advisors around them. And it might not be formalized, it probably isn't internally, but anybody that has an opportunity to have a coach, I recommend it. I know that throughout my career, I was lucky that I had advocates, I had sponsors, I had coaches. And that didn't go away as I evolved in my career. As a CEO, I had a coach. And I would say it changed from a coach or a mentor to more of a trusted advisor. But you
mm,
still need that group around you because we're all, again, we're all on a journey, we're all evolving, and we can all improve, and sometimes we're not aware of things that can easily be tweaked, that can help
mhm,
you improve, or things that might be detractors that you're not aware of.
mhm,
So I think it's good having that outside influence and somebody that you will listen to, that you trust has your best interest at heart,
mhm.
that has the ability to hold you accountable in a different way than a boss or a manager.
Yeah, and sometimes those individuals, coaches outside of the workplace
Mhm.
will help you, like you said, identify things, but also will give it to you straight.
Exactly.
And whereas sometimes mentors or even sponsors internally, if you're a high performer, they want to retain you.
Mhm.
And so they try to kind of smooth things over and not be as candid as maybe they should be.
Right.
In fact, I always say one of the best things I ever did was ask when I was hired into my first C-suite role, ask for an outside coach.
Right.
And it ended up being some of the best money that they had ever spent because I acclimated so much quicker
Hmm.
into the culture and got so much more done.
And I think now it's much more common for people to have coaches. And probably 15, 20 years ago, coaches were seen as for somebody that needed help or remedial effort almost. And I
Right.
think
Yeah.
coaches today, it's very your best people should have coaches because they're the ones that really can benefit from it. And I'm seeing organizations really sign up for that and start to do that. And I know that's something that I've been doing with a lot of different companies. And it's first off very, very rewarding for me. But
Hmm.
also I believe, when you're working with high performers and helping them figure out what's their path, how are they going to get to the next level? What things do they need to be aware of? Where are
Hmm.
they over indexing? Are some of your strengths becoming overplayed and therefore negatives? And working through that, I find, is extremely beneficial as a leader looking to continue to evolve in an organization.
Hmm. Yeah. And somebody like you who has sat at the top of an organization can see things so much clearer than those who are trying to ascend, clearly. All right. So we do this thing called rapid fire questions
Okay,
where
that
they're
sounds fun.
one sentence questions with one sentence answers.
Okay,
Are you willing to play?
I'm willing to play.
All right. Let's do it. All right. So, what is a book that you have given away most often and why?
Okay, it's a book called Be Board Ready by Betsy Atkins, and it's a book for first time directors. And it's critical because when you move from an operating role into a director role, you do need to navigate and act differently. And this is a book that teaches you how to do that, what the watchouts are.
Who had the greatest positive impact on your career and why?
Okay, I can't play this one by the rules. I will give four sentences for four people if I'm allowed.
Okay. Oh,
Okay?
please. Yes.
So,
You get latitude.
Reader's Digest was a very formative time in my career. So I'd start with John Klingel, who was in charge of the magazine group, and I reported into him, and he saw my potential and gave me the opportunity.
Mm,
Eric Schreier, who became the CEO at Reader's Digest, who believed in me and pushed me way outside of my comfort zone while I was kicking and screaming, and told me it would prepare me to be a CEO one day.
wow.
Mary Berner, who was another CEO at Nutrisystem, who taught me about the importance of communication and taking a stand on the things that really matter to you. And the last one is my husband, because you can't be
Mhm.
superwoman all by yourself. And we were, again, as I said earlier, we were both very hands on raising a family, which allowed me to also have a successful career.
What is the number one skill successful executives need to become an expert in the next 1 to 5 years?
Resilience and adaptability to change. I think it's
Mm,
really important. Things aren't going to stay the same. And look at people that navigated the pandemic. Those CEOs
mm,
had to be resilient and be willing and able to adapt quickly without all the facts or information in front of them.
absolutely. Who do you follow on social media and why?
I follow Mackenzie Scott and Melinda French Gates because I believe they're using their privilege and money to make a difference and drive societal change. And I get excited every time they donate their money to one place or another. So I like watching that and seeing how they're navigating that to
That
do
is so
good,
true.
to do a lot of good.
To do good. Are you planning to write a leadership book?
Maybe, maybe.
Okay. I threw that in there just hoping,
Oh,
hoping that you would say yes.
maybe.
All right, maybe. Why should CEOs give HR the place at the table they so deserve?
Because people are a company's most important asset, and culture is the foundation that determines success or failure. Big believer in that.
You are. Where can people go to learn more about you?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can find me Dawn Zier at LinkedIn. I do a lot of posts, I do articles now and then, share a lot of different information that I find interesting. So that's probably the best place.
Terrific. Yes. And if there's any interview that you can find that Dawn has done out on YouTube or any of social media, highly, highly recommend it. We'll put a couple in the comments below. So with us today is Dawn Zier, prior CEO of Nutrisystem, current board chair, board member, and CEO coach. Dawn, thank you so much for sharing your insight. It has been such an honor and a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Berta. Great to be here.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for watching. We would love it if you shared your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed in the comments below. And if you got value from the video, it would mean the world to us if you hit the like button and subscribe to the HRMorning channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Voices of HR.